Hi, and welcome back to this week's edition of Crosshairs, the program where we discuss the big national or international security issue of the week. I'm joined today by Dr. Ajay Sani, one of the preeminent experts on Indian security, to discuss why months after the violence in Manipur has started, things just don't seem to be getting better. Tens of thousands of police personnel, central police personnel, the military, of course, deployed in some parts of the state, but violence continuing. The horrific sexual assault on two women we've seen on our screens this last week happened a while ago, but killing has become routinized. So I'll come straight to it, Ajay. Big police force, one of the highest ratios of police personnel to population anywhere in the country, big paramilitary presence, more and more CRPF personnel being pumped in. Why still this mess? Is it incompetence or bad planning?
It's not incompetence, it's not bad planning, it's pure intent. You will recall, and I recall, KPS Gill used to repeat this quite often. He said that if any riot in this anywhere in this country lasts for more than 24 hours, it is collusive. The state is behind it. The state is supporting or orchestrating the violence. Maybe he put too high a standard. We may say not 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. But certainly not more than a month and a half, approaching 2 months. So it's very clear it's collusive. It's no use talking about the number of policemen on the ground. Within our system, the elected representatives have a stranglehold at the apex of power. Nothing happens without them. All this nonsense of police autonomy or of independence of particular institutions. Why does a group of civil society organizations come to the Supreme Court with a petition that kindly you direct the army to protect the tribal populations in the hill? Of course, the Supreme Court very rightly, at a certain level, constitutionally very rightly, says, look, we can't sit here and start managing deployments on the ground. That's not our job. That's not our competence. It has to be done by the state. And then it directs the state to make sure that the tribal populations are protected. What is the meaning of that observation? Obviously, the Supreme Court is not going to say that, look, the state government is in collusion.
Right.
But the very fact that the Supreme Court needs to tell the state government to protect a certain section of the population, despite the overwhelming presence of force. Overwhelming. I mean, the police population ratio in Manipur, as you say, is among the highest in the country. It is at least 6 times the national average. Probably much more according to the current figures of population and the numbers of policemen that the Manipur government has now submitted. By my calculation, it is 1,388 policemen per 100,000 population.
And just to give our viewers a sense of that, one of the numbers that is widely touted is 250 per 100,000. This is 6 times that number, more or less.
Yes, and that is to manage a post. No, and you're only talking about the polices yet.
Yeah.
You're not talking about the 50-odd companies of CRPF that have been sent in. You're not talking about the enhanced military presence. You're not talking about the RR, which has a permanent presence and operational deployment across Manipur.
And still the mess. And I want to sort of take this into bits and maybe start with the police. One of the astounding things we've seen in the course of this violence is the police collapsing and fracturing along ethnic lines. So Meitei policemen flagrantly batting for their community, Kuki policemen abandoning their posts in Meitei areas and heading off to Kuki-dominated areas. Now, Prakash Singh had warned about this many years ago when we had caste violence in Haryana, and police personnel, had refused orders from people of the other rival caste. There'd been incidents of collusion frequently. Is this what lies ahead in Indian policing, that caste, community, these will overwhelm discipline, because we didn't see this in Punjab, we didn't see this in Kashmir. Why are we confronting it now?
It lies ahead, and it does lie behind as well. In many, many riot situations, even in Punjab, at a certain point of time, if you recall, in the early phases of the insurgency, there was complete mistrust between the central forces and the Punjab police. There was also a complete collapse of policing in Punjab. Not necessarily because they were sympathetic to or collusive with the
Khalistanis,
Pindranwale and the extremists, but because they felt that they did not have the might of the state behind them. When you collude with criminals, when every time you go out to arrest a criminal, you receive orders from above saying, lay off. There is no use saying, oh, but the police has a problem. It's not a police discipline problem. It is a breakdown of state governance problem led by the political leadership. There is forget about all this police, police is caste-based. Everything in this country is caste-based and communal-based, religion-based. But that doesn't mean that people don't do their jobs when they are given a clear mandate from above. It is only when the mandate is corrupted, when the mandate is perverted, when the mandate is explicitly, when a chief minister falsifies the realities of the ground and starts saying all this violence is because of terrorism. When for the first time to my memory, the chief of army staff, and of course the chief of defense staff is a new post, both come out openly and say this is not an insurgency issue, these are ethnic clashes.
Right.
Contradicting the chief minister. I have never seen something like this being done by the army. Other services, perhaps you will find examples, but I do not think the army has ever, in any of its deployments, turned around and openly, not using the word, but effectively saying the chief minister is a liar. Have you ever seen this ever?
No. And
how do you then?
But astounding to me also that in many of these situations, you've had small crowds of women, maybe a few hundred people, or a small crowd of protesters, but succeeding in blocking highways, in blocking the military from reaching villages, to the point where the Indian army is having to ship supplies from a neighboring state to its positions because the highway is blocked. Doesn't this speak of an almost bizarre degree of weakness? Surely it can't be impossible in a sovereign state to keep highways open from handfuls of protesters.
Look, it's not necessarily a sign of weakness. It may also be a posture of a force posture. We do not always rely on kinetic force. If you are going into an area where you are already convinced that the population is aggrieved, and possibly justifiably so, if we are to go by the Army High Command statements, if we are then begin to use force against these protesters would be wrong. Particularly, and this has always been the case, the armed forces have by and large been extremely reluctant to use force against groups of women. Okay.
Right.
So, are you asking me whether the army can clear a highway of 200 women or not in approximately 3 seconds? Are you asking me, is it desirable that it do so by the use of extreme force? I don't think either of us would suggest that.
But Ajay, we had all these special forces set up, women battalions of the Central Police, the Rapid Action Force that was supposed to be able to use non-lethal, reasonably moderate force quite well to deal with these situations. What on earth are they doing?
Do we need the use of force here? Is that the solution? And my answer at this juncture seems to be that the forces assessment is that the use of force against the tribal populations would be unjustifiable.
And the plains people who are also blockading roads?
Well, the plains people are blockading roads with full state sanction. So you can't act against them in any event. So as far as the tribal groups are concerned, I would suggest these sort of forces feel that the use of lethal force, of even non-lethal force, is not justifiable if we can find even a circuitous resolution to the problem.
And
In the valley, they have
unfortunately,
got
the other
very clear
party has
mandate
the support of the state, so the question of acting against it.
of acting against these groupings is not does not even arise.
Moving on a little bit to the military, very unfortunate situation where a group of terrorists, one of them publicly wanted for the murder of Indian Army personnel in a terrorist attack, have to be released into the custody of an MLA and then mysteriously disappear. Again, these are things that are unprecedented. I mean, you've watched Punjab close up, Kashmir. Why is something like this happening? This is a person who is guilty
It's not
of...
unprecedented. First of all, Praveen, you have probably written about these things before. It's just that we tend to forget. It's not unprecedented for terrorists to be released for on political interventions or on the interventions of particular social and pressure groups with significant followings or
Right.
partisan pressure groups. So it's not unique. Why is this happening? Again, we come back to the same thing. It is a calculus on the part both of the state agencies, the political executive on the one hand, and the military leadership, as to whether it is worth the collateral or the secondary costs to pursue just this single objective at this juncture. That no, we're not going to let this guy go, irrespective of what happens. So I think everything around the crisis in Manipur is leading back to the same basic logic or the same basic dynamic, that this is a politically led, orchestrated conflict with the state overwhelmingly backing one subgroup to that one group to that conflict. And you have armed forces of various hues, central forces in particular, and the army and the RR, trying to be fair as possible in this extremely perverse political situation.
Extremely perverse political situation. Looking forward a little bit, this perverse situation is playing out on a border which is largely porous and geographically, impossible to build a sort of great wall on. You have a state of anarchy and breakdown in adjoining Myanmar with weapons flows streaming into the country in the hands of various militia groups fighting the military dictatorship there. You have a large-scale drug problem. Do you foresee that this holds out a threat to destabilize or reignite insurgencies in the Northeast, which for many years have been kind of tamping down or dying down, not completely, but quite significantly?
2 points. One, last year, Manipur had a total of 7 insurgency-linked fatalities. Today, if I remember correctly, according to SATP data, we've already had 68.
Right.
Let's look at the numbers, all right? So I think that at one level answers your question. However, are we seeing the possibility of a mass resurgence of insurgencies across even Manipur, leave alone the rest of the Northeast? I don't think so. I don't think so. These insurgencies no longer have the kind of mass support that they had earlier. The security forces have learned to deal with the problem with far greater effectiveness than was the case in the past. The kind of legitimacy these groups had, both domestically and internationally, at one point, anti-state groupings had at one point of time, is no longer there. Consequently, the state has the leeway to adopt a much wider range of instrumentalities than was available to them in the past. They worked with their at least one hand tied behind their back earlier.
Right.
Their hands have substantially been freed. So I don't think you can have a insurgency, a significant revival of a mass insurgency. Can we, however, see spikes in incidents? Well, we are already seeing spikes in incidents. Wherever you create this kind of ugliness, let's just take Jammu and Kashmir on the other hand. We had a low of 112 in 2012. Sorry, 121 according to our data. According to government data, 99 fatalities in all categories in Jammu and Kashmir.
Which probably in per capita terms makes Jammu and Kashmir as safe, if not safer, than Delhi or Bombay or any of these other places.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So from there, we've just gone up. They said 370 abrogation, abolition, whatever you would like to call that, dilution of 370 is going to solve the problem of insurgency. Why do we still have annual fatalities which are significantly higher than the bottoming out of 112? So every time you play political mischief, there is a greater burden placed upon the security forces, who have to carry this burden at the cost of blood. Please understand. And of course, the civilian population who is also being killed. And of course, the terrorist insurgents who are also somebody's children. So every time you unleash this kind of political mischief, you do it in a ugly, cynical calculus.
Right. And I'm thinking of, I mean, we were discussing Punjab and Kashmir, where politicians again played mischief for many years before the explosion of insurgency.
Absolutely.
Possibly without realizing how bad it was going to get. But surely we should have learned that lesson by now.
Surely. And obviously we haven't. Obviously that there is this, I would still suggest, false confidence that nothing can happen. While I have, as I have already said, I think our security forces know how to deal with these problems far better than they did. They've learned at great cost to themselves in lives and treasure. But don't begin to believe that this cannot happen under any circumstances. If you continue with unrelenting mischief in certain regions, we have extremely diverse, extremely divided populations. Unless we learn to carry them all together, and as long as our politics primarily is based on divisiveness, in creating hate between people, polarizing people, then please understand these forces cannot, with absolute confidence, we cannot say that they will always prevail. So there may be a point at which the public ire will well over and overwhelm or co-opt the forces. Please understand.
Is it only a question of public ire, though? I mean, one of the interesting features of the Manipur situation was that you had these, and this has happened across the Northeast, where you have these ceasefires with various insurgent groups. Those insurgent groups were supposed to return to camps and be given stipends by the government while political negotiations were conducted. They had to deposit their weapons, but didn't actually disarm. But in practice, many of these insurgent groups have become gundas for various politicians, armed gundas. They engage in various kinds of criminality and extortion. So is this peace that we talk about actually built on somewhat shakier ground than we imagine? Because all you've done is really make an insurgent into a criminal who operates at a politician's behest.
Well, we have a political leadership that is itself completely criminalized. So if I can take you away from, mass violence of a terrorism or insurgency kind, and bring you into what is now generic political criminal violence, that's an improvement. That's certainly an improvement. And that seems to be the calculus of the criminals who are now ruling this country. I mean, across the board, whether it is at the center or in the states, you look at the ministers of the union cabinet, you look at the members of parliament, you have the union cabinet has 40% plus of ministers with criminal cases against them. You have a member of parliament composition of more than 35% criminal cases against them. And I will remind you that the Prime Minister had in 2014, among his early statements, said that I will set up special courts in which all politicians who have been charged with any kind of crime will be brought to book.
That's right. These famous MP-MLA courts.
Sorry?
These famous MP-MLA courts.
Yes, they have come into being, but I am yet to see anybody being convicted. I am yet to see any cases being settled against anyone significant or prominent. I see so many people with charges of heinous crimes sitting in positions of power. So what is the use of saying that, oh, but these guys are also running a little extortion rackets? They're running extortion rackets, as you said, under partisan political and possibly state political protection, patronage, and collusion.
Yes.
So is it a tenuous peace? Well, of course, it's not peace for the guys who are having to face the gun for extortion. But it's better than having bombs put here and there and, just randomly killing off a few hundred people, if not more, in each state
A
every
final
year.
question, Ajay. One of the solutions you occasionally hear, especially from retired military officers, is that withdrawing the Armed Forces Special Powers Act from parts of Manipur, particularly the valley, was a mistake. And if the military had had the powers it was given under AFSPA, things would be very much better than they are. Do you share that perception?
Look, I've always been a supporter of AFSPA. However, AFSPA is applied on the basis of political assessments, political and security assessments of its necessity in particular areas. Now, even if AFSPA was in play over here, it does not cover civil violence.
Right.
It does not cover the actions of Meitei and Kuki mobs. You have no protection there.
Right. I mean, it's not the army's job to be stopping mobs from burning somebody's house down.
Exactly. So I think these are, the entire debate on AFSPA, and I think we should have a discussion on this separately at some point of time, is completely contrafactual, is completely based on an ignorance of the actual law, on an ignorance of the succession of Supreme Court judgments and observations on the Act. AFSPA is nothing more than a minimal act that allows the armed forces and the central forces to function in a situation of insurgency. It's an enabling act.
Right. It
Everyone
basically
talks
gives
about
the military the
immunity
same powers
and
as the police already enjoy under the law.
Exactly. Everyone talks about immunity and impunity. There is no such thing as immunity and impunity. But then, do abuses occur? The abuses are not of the act. The abuses are of the system that does not allow the punitive elements of the act to play against people who misuse their power. I have deployed an armed force. I have got to give it certain powers to shoot, to detain, to transport, whatever. But that is not a sweeping power to shoot and to rape.
Absolutely.
Anyone I please.
I don't think this is generally understood, but as per...
but this is the discourse. This is the dominant discourse.
Does indeed say that officers, you need central government permission before you can prosecute them, but the police also enjoy that power at the best of times. You can't just prosecute.
And if you go into the record of human rights violations of the recent years in the Northeast, you will see that police forces are accused far more often than any of the central forces of human rights abuses.
That's fascinating.
They're not under AFSPA. They're not under AFSPA. So this entire discourse is meant to be, it is not one, it is a discourse of ignorance. It is a discourse of obscurantism. It is an intentional discourse to muddy the waters. None of these people are actually looking at the facts, looking at operational requirements and demands, legal requirements and demands, and the actual pattern and causation of human rights violations in these areas. And there is nothing in the act that says that if a man goes out and rapes and murders, he is not to be prosecuted. All it says is that you can't just go as a private individual and begin demand initiation of prosecution. You have got to take a central government sanction on it. Now, if the central government is collusive in crime, well, then that's not unique just to what it is doing with the armed forces. The central government and the state governments are collusive in a whole range of crimes today. That is the critical security challenge of this country today. that those who are intending
a final question, Ajay. Given this collusion between the political system and the security forces, excuse me, between these violent perpetrators, people have demanded autonomy for the police and for the courts to step up to, and ensure that autonomy. Do you see any purchase in this push for autonomy, or are we flogging a dead horse?
It's utter and complete nonsense. If you give me autonomy and I am in a permanent service, you see, notionally, at least the politician can be thrown out after 5 years. If you start this, I'll give you a small example. You say fixed tenure for certain ranks. Now, I, as a superintendent of police in a district, become a problem in a situation of explosive violence. I'm part of the problem, rightly or wrongly. I'm either perceived as biased or I am biased. But I have a fixed tenure of 2 years. And today, you cannot accuse a senior police officer of wrongdoing unless you have watertight evidence of crime against him. I mean, the ACRs are, nobody can write an ACR which says very good. Every officer in the government of India is excellent.
Right. Because
the ACRs are presented to the subordinate officers, who immediately go to court the minute they get anything less than excellent. Look, talk sense within the system within which you are functioning. The Supreme Court's directives on police reform, they were utter and complete nonsense. And I said it on the day the Supreme Court announced that order. It will be somewhere on the record with Doordarshan.
So I think we're drawn back to the slightly bleak conclusion then, that there is no alternative to having an accountable political executive. And there is no sort of shortcut to making sure that dysfunctional or bad faith governance is tightened up by some legal or constitutional magical device. Unfortunately, that also probably means that the people of Manipur and the wider Northeast will be living with the very grim fallout of these events for quite some time to come. I always turn to Ajay when I'm looking to be depressed and feel bad about the future. But we'll conclude that discussion here and come back, I think, to this AFSPA debate, as you've suggested, in a future show. Thank you, as always, for making the time to join us today. Goodbye.
Thank you for having me, Praveen.